All right, we are live. Welcome everybody to the Killer Be Killed show. My name is Josh Kaywood, and Clayton Pate is joining as he has been. And first, you need to note, obviously, Damien is not here. Damien is sick, and I offered him the idea to let me run the show, and he said yes. So we're gonna see how this goes. I'm sure it's gonna be. I'm sure it's gonna be all jacked up. But you know, it's the least listened to podcast on the interwebs, as Damon likes to say. And so we can only offend so many people.
There you go. We'll try to help as many people as we can, just us.
Yeah, exactly. So truth be told, I actually was struggling to find something to talk about today. I've been super busy and I just couldn't find something. But then I came across an idea. And so if you want to talk about it, Clayton, we can. So are you familiar? So for everybody who doesn't know, I have a degree in military history. I love military history. I love studying it. My particular focus is irregular warfare, with a concentration focus more towards the French and Indian War and the American Revolution, like a personal interest there.
That is interesting.
So with all that being said,
all that stuff in your noggin from. Now I think I got a clue.
Yeah, I'm a nerd.
I read history books, school, like college, high school level history books for fun.
Yeah.
I always have.
I do too. Doing my studies was the worst because I'd always get lost in the rabbit holes of like, ooh, that's interesting. Next thing you know, like an hour been burned reading some random article about something.
Yeah. I feel your pain. So you are
it's good though. Company. It's good though. But anyway, so if you have something that you want to talk about that's more of a current event, by all means, Clayton, bring it up. But otherwise, I thought it'd be interesting. Okay. Otherwise, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about the general rules for the ranging service. Have you heard of them before?
I don't think I have.
Also known as Rogers Rules of Ranging. Does that sound familiar? No? Still not ringing a bell?
Sounds vaguely familiar, yeah.
Okay. Do you know who Robert Rogers is?
We'll make this simple and say I don't. The name sounds familiar, but right now,
okay, not a worries. Not a worries. For those that don't know, so in the French and Indian War, which is also the 7 Years' War, which arguably could be the First World War, but that's another topic for another day. There was a guy by the name of Robert Rogers who, back before the American Revolution, we had the French and Indian War, which was literally like 10 years before the American Revolution, right? Is when it ended. 10 years or less than the American Revolution. Sorry, there's like a little gnat flying around. Anyways, Robert Rogers, he was famous for his creating his ranger groups, right? And so Rogers Rangers, many people have heard of that term. Have you heard of that term?
I think I have. I know I've heard of several somebody's Rangers type groups before.
Yeah,
I think that's one of them that I've heard of.
Yeah, so there were a few, especially in the American Revolution. There were a few different ones that did really good things. But Rogers Rangers was kind of the first truly successful, what we would consider like a reconnaissance ranger, right? So nowadays we have like our American Rangers, right? You know, the Army Rangers, and they don't really do reconnaissance missions as much. Not saying that they don't, but they're way more focused on direct action, right? And so they just go in, they do raids and stuff like that, and then they leave. But it used to be back in the day that a ranger was somebody who ranged, meaning that they covered long distances to do reconnaissance and things like that, right? And so the British in the French and Indian War, the reason it's called the French and Indian War is because we're at war with the French and a lot of the Indians, or now Native Americans.
Right.
Yep. And so the British, we were colonists. We were not Americans yet. We were still colonists. And so the British said, hey, we've got all these colonists here. Let's go ahead and use them as a lot of our soldiers, which they did. And Rogers was a talented young guy who had a lot of ideas about warfare and had spent his whole life growing up in the woods doing trapping and ranging and all kinds of stuff. And so he basically secured a commission with the British as a ranger, and they were like, sure, go ahead and start your little like ranger company, right? Basically it was like open calls, it was like, hey, we just need troops. And it's like he shows up, it's like, hey, I'll support a company of rangers, and they're like, cool, man, go for it, right? And so he like, he recruits his people, and then and so he recruits his people, and they he creates a company, and then his company is so successful, they're like, we'll make a battalion. And then his battalion is so successful, they actually start mimicking the way he does things for like other several battalions, right? And so this basically produces the vast majority of the really successful rangers during that war. But anyways, at one point in time, the British come to him, and I'm not going to get into too much of the gritty details because I know people don't care except for nerds like me. But the British come to him, and they're like,
no disrespect to them, but this is getting interesting. So proceed, please. Dig as deep as you like.
I mean, I guess what I'm saying is like names aren't that important. Like nobody really cares about the names of like what British guy came to him. Right, you know what I mean? Yeah. But anyways, and so they come to him and they're like, hey, your group is super successful, right? Like more successful than everybody else's. We want you to train a bunch more rangers. And Rogers, being the excellent military mind that he was like, well, if I'm going to train a whole bunch of people, then I should probably put into some sort of form, what makes me so successful, right? And that's where he comes up with his general rules for the ranging service. And it's 19 points. And, or sorry, not 19 points. It's 28 points. But a lot of them are kind of like repeat, like variations of the same. Anyways, and so I love his, in fact, so what he does with his rangers, right? The way he does training, the way he executes missions, everything, the way he leads, ends up becoming the foundation for rangers, special operations, even to today, right? Everybody basically uses what he created. And it had the principles, right? We always talk about principles versus techniques, right? The principles have not really changed over time, right? And you get these, when you're talking about warfare, right? And you talk about the evolutions of warfare, you get where sometimes certain principles evolve, right? Because warfare itself evolves, like obviously, we had, like sword and shield and spear. And then all of a sudden archery became more prevalent in warfare. And it was like, well, now we have to adapt our tactics to archery. And then, the crossbow was developed, and the crossbow was like, oh my gosh, this is super devastating. And then tactics had to change again, and then
the cannon, that kind of started changing everything from body armor, from the plate mail armor, all the way up to the castle walls.
Oh, for sure, yeah. Things like the stirrup, even, right?
For hundreds of years to become more and more effective, primarily as defensive type equipment and structures. In a fairly short period of time, started really becoming obsolete completely.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly. And the other is the stirrup, right? People don't realize that like warfare really changed when the stirrup came out, because it made cavalry truly prevalent, right? Before the stirrup, you had the chariot, right? Because you couldn't effectively ride the horse through combat and stay seated, unless you're a Mongolian and really good at like their special techniques, which right, which was something different. But as soon as the stirrup, that stupid flag, as soon as the stirrup came about, though, even the Mongolians decided to like adopt a stirrup, right? Because it was so effective. Okay. So anyways, so those things, while they didn't necessarily change like core military principles, it changed like, small ways that we do military conduct, right? And so Rogers' rules for ranging, right? So you figure that this occurred, he wrote these rules, I don't remember the exact date, but it's sometime between 1753 and 1763. He wrote the rules, so we're talking probably mid 1750s. I mean, that was almost 300 years ago. And
so many of them are still valid.
And even with the advent of like all of our modern technologies and everything else, his rules for ranging are still applicable when it comes to the conduct of patrol operations, reconnaissance, irregular warfare, etc. Right. So let's go through some of these ranging rules, and let's talk about them, because not only are they applicable to quote unquote warfare, but like I've always said, and I will always say, right, warfare, general warfare, scales to individual combat, right? The general principles always remain the same. And so let's talk about these general rules for the ranging service. And I love how like we keep getting like, oh, like 4 people are watching, and then like 1 person's watching, and like 3 people are watching, and like 1 person's watching. They're like, oh gosh, Josh is on some history kick. Let's leave.
Yeah.
But anyways, all right. So the first rule, right? Number 1 is always the most important, right? Because you're like, what's the most? What am I going to put down first? And so, so here we go. All rangers are to be subject to the rules and articles of war, to appear at roll call every evening on their own parade, equipped each with a firelock, 60 rounds of powder and ball, and a hatchet. At which time, an officer from each company is to inspect the same to see they are in order, so as to be ready on any emergency to march at a minute's warning. And before they are dismissed, the necessary guards are redrafted and scouts for the next day appointed. All right. Why do you think that's number 1?
Well, I mean, that's the foundation for your security, for your unit, for your operation, and everything else. You got to be prepared, and you have certain, general orders, if you would, that have to be. I mean, they're not reiterated every time you go on duty. They're given. They don't change, and that's kind of the purpose for those. So, and by them being most of them probably volunteers, then they have a certain responsibility for the upkeep and the supply of their own weapons and ammo a lot of times. And so that's a lot of the things that's establishing the baselines. Kind of like when you show up for duty, you got to have these things squared away, ready to go. We don't have time to fiddle around with it before we go do whatever it is we got to do. I think that would probably be a primary driver behind a lot of that. That and some level of uniformity as well.
Yeah. So I mean, you hit lots of different points in there, and it's crazy because it's one little paragraph, but there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 different elements to this paragraph, right? They're all really important. So the first one, all rangers are subject to the rules and articles of war. I mean, how important is it, and from a self-defense perspective, to obey the law?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I mean, no way quicker to land yourself in jail than to not obey the law, right? Even if it's self-defense. Yep. Okay.
Yep. For the military, you got your rules of engagement, and for a civilian arena, basically, you got the same thing. So, yeah, they're very important to establish that and have them known, and to emphasize their importance.
Yeah, and, I mean, you were in the military.
Core of everything that you do.
Yeah, you were in the military. I was in the military. How many briefings did you get on the law of land warfare?
We got a few. Yeah,
you got a few, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's important, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Appear at roll call every evening. So okay. So this is a couple of different spots, right? So appear where you're supposed to be, at the time where you're supposed to be on your own parade, and properly equipped, right? And so it's like in the military they always have a saying, right? Right place, right time, right uniform.
Yep. And 15 minutes early. We're on military time. That means 15 minutes before the assigned time. Yeah.
Yeah. So how does this translate? And you talked about being prepared, right? So how does this translate to self-defense? Well, if you're not leaving the house with your EDC, then is it EDC?
Yep, that's right.
if you're not where you tell people you're going to be, are you being as safe as possible? Right? Then people don't know where to look for you.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of things that can go into that. Yeah. And so then like the next part, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, especially as a matter of personal discipline, and as primary protectors in our little group, our family, our whatever, as many of us are, we have the responsibility to be ready at all times, because we don't pick the times that it's going to go down. It would be nice
and that goes into the next part.
It's going to be the other guy.
Yeah, it goes right in the next part, right? Yeah. So why is that important? It tells you.
Yeah,
and it tells you why it's important, right?
Convenience store
to be ready on
the road line, carry all 4 guns and all 3 knives. I'm just going to the convenience store. You might not want to do that way. You might want to carry and gear up, because you don't, like I said, it's not up to us a lot of times when we're faced with that day. It kind of finds us on its terms instead of the other way around. So
yeah. And so it says, and then the officer is supposed to inspect everybody, right, to see that they're in order and ready to be at a moment's notice for an emergency, right? So how important is inspection, right? Self-evaluation, right? Damien has a saying, always train honestly, right? Self-inspection, always important.
Right.
But let's say you're right. We always talk about emergency stuff here, being a survival instructor, emergency stuff. So like how important is inspecting your gear and inspecting the people of your emergency, like survival team's gear, right? Making sure that everybody's doing the right thing.
Right. Oh yeah. And you don't ever rely on your own inspection of the gear. Get your buddy to inspect yours, and you inspect his.
Right.
Look it over, make sure everything looks good.
Yep.
Because in a hurry you'll miss things, and it's the little things that can really bite you.
Yeah. All right. Let's go to number 2. All right. Whenever you are ordered out of the enemy's forts or frontiers for discoveries, if your number be small, march in a single file, keeping at such a distance from each other as to prevent one shot from killing 2 men, sending 1 man or more forward, and the like on each side, at the distance of 20 yards from the main body. If the ground you march over will admit of it, to give the signal to the officer of the approach of an enemy and of their number, etc. Okay. So that one's a little bit more clouded. But the reason why he emphasized single file was you have to recognize the area that he was operating in, right? He was operating in the north, what we would call basically northern New York, Ontario area, right? Quebec, all those areas, okay? And back almost 300 years ago, it was heavily forested. It was super dense. You pretty much couldn't get through without being in single file, right? If anybody who's done maneuvers at night, which a lot of times Rogers was operating at night without night vision, because it's almost 300 years ago, right? 270 years ago or whatever. You had to actually be able to see the people that are part of your group, right? So you could get we talk about hand signals and, you make your stops and your signs and this and that, so you can be quiet. If you can't see them, what good are those, right?
Exactly.
And then keeping at such a distance from each other to prevent one shot from killing 2 men, right? We'll get into how that could potentially apply to self-defense, but from a military standpoint, that's obviously important because you don't want people to take out 2 birds with 1 stone, right? You want everybody to be able to stay in the fight as much as possible. And then today we still use that same parameter, although we keep more of a distance because of grenades and stuff like that, right? And then sending 1 man or more forward and the like on each side. So picture, if you will, you have your column, right? Let's see if I can get my hand in here. So you have your column. What he's saying is have a guy here, have a guy here, and then have guys at least 1 up here, if not more, right? And depending on the size of the movement, you would have more outliers to protect the entire group, right? And it's their job to be the early warning for enemy.
Yeah, they're like the feelers, you know.
Yep.
With antennae sticking out there that picks up, oh shit, you know, and it can alert the rest of them. Yep.
Yeah. And if you want to get really kind of technical with it, it could really be, wow, nobody's watching right now. This is excellent.
Oh man, we're gonna run everybody off.
David's gonna be like, you drove everybody away with your dumb history. But anyways, and so if you want to get really technical with it, right? So when you have that formation, you have your single column, and then you've got people on the sides. You're actually could arguably be tell people that you're using what's called as a box formation, which was actually invented by the Spartans. And that box formation has proved to be super, super useful because it provides early warning, defense, maneuverability, everything in one formation.
Maneuverability and stability all in one. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So, but self-defense, how does this apply to our self-defense? Okay. So if you take the concept of your movement and being aware of your movement, that's just awareness, right? Having people on all the sides and everything. We're talking about awareness, right? So if number one is be prepared, then number two is be aware, right? So obviously,
it's really kind of that simple. It's complicated, but when you understand it, it's simple. You know,
it's simple,
all
right?
of that
Exactly.
Just what we
it comes right back to basic principles, right? It's taking these things and taking the principles out of it. So you don't just have a technique. The technique is using single file, blah, 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 blah. That's the technique. But the principle is be aware, right? Be aware of your terrain, be aware of where you're, a potential enemy, be aware of your surroundings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? All right.
Be hard to kill. Well, how do you do that? Well, here's 3 or 4 different ways to be hard to kill. Right.
Be a hard target, right? So
exactly.
And again, he even specifies if your number be small, right? So he's saying, he's recognizing that if you're moving a lot of people, if you're moving a battalion, right? Like you're probably not going to be marching in single file with a couple outliers. You're going to have to adjust your movement. And there were many times where the Rangers were tasked as security for the larger group movements, right? And what they would do is they would use their smaller formation of single file with outliers in coordination with the larger troop movement, right? And they would basically be, the outliers, but in bigger groups running their own smaller unit levels, right? All right, here we go. Number 3, if you march over marshes or soft ground, change your position and march abreast of each other to prevent the enemy from tracking you, as they would do if you marched in a single file, till you get over such ground and then resume your former order. And march till it is quite dark before you encamp, which do, if possible, on a piece of ground which may afford your sentries the advantage of seeing or hearing the enemy some considerable distance, keeping one half of your whole party awake alternately through the night. Okay, what do you get from that?
Well, one of the biggest things on that, especially at the latter part, is especially during the nighttime. And if you've ever been in a swampy, marshy area, I mean, there's a lot of background noise in a lot of those areas. You got every kind of insect in the world that likes water, frogs, all that stuff. One set of ears listening for hours on end, you're going to hear all kind of, it's going to be hard to pick out. Really, it's going to be hard to distinguish between the background noise and real threats, the sounds of real threats. And so the more ears you have listening, just because, the acoustics of a marshy type land, especially in the warmer weather. I know we're talking about a cold part of the country, but in the warmer weather, even in those areas, it's hard to hear yourself think sometimes because the local wildlife is making such a fuss. One person's not going to be an effective monitor of sounds is one of the things that jumps out to me on that.
Yeah. You're right. though I wouldn't call that a principle.
Well, yes,
Yeah. So, if you take it as a principle, right? Number 3, what's the principles found in number 3? You have that you need to change your,
adapt to your environment.
yeah, you need to adapt, right? Because it's saying, if you reach these open marshy areas where you're no longer as concealable, you need to change your position, right?
Yeah.
You need to be adaptable, right? And then obviously the second part is security, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to ever leave yourself unsafe, unsecure, right? You need to know. So in this, from self-defense perspective, I would say, don't be off your guard, right? Be aware of your surroundings, go back to awareness, and don't be off your guard. Don't let somebody approaching you, let your guard down, and then now you're a victim, right? Now you've been attacked. You need to always make sure you're aware and awake.
Yep.
Okay. Number 4, sometime before you come to the place, you would reconnoiter, make a stand, and send 1 or 2 men in whom you can confide to look out the best ground for making your observations. All right. This one's a bit harder from a self-defense perspective, but the principle here is when you show up, right? So like in the military, you do what's called your objective rally point. You stop a certain distance away from your actual objective. You make your preparations. But what you do is you send a scouting party first, because you don't want to just like show up with everybody, because you don't know what you're even getting into.
Right. Yeah,
Get into. Yeah, you don't know what you're getting into, right? So it's like even if you have intelligence from like the day before, well, in 24 hours, lots of things can change.
Yep.
And so you kind of hold back. You send a couple people forward, and then they make an initial reconnaissance, because 1 or 2 people can be way quieter, way more stealthy than a group of people. Even if it's like 5 or 6 people, 1 or 2 is still quieter. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see, self-defense principle out of this.
Well, what you're doing, you're scanning ahead before you commit to an area. That to me says a lot about situational awareness and our movements from one point to another, whether it be in a parking lot or a restaurant or whatever. You're even if you don't send somebody physically ahead, you are trying to look ahead, at least, even if it's just you, I think.
I mean, if you take it as like the reconnoiter aspect, right? Like, well, what should you do in every place you go? You should make note of your emergency exits, make note of the AEDs, make note of the fire extinguishers, et cetera, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
And
make sure
once you start doing that, it becomes second nature, and it's not hard anymore. That's what a lot of people get frustrated or don't understand. Once you do it a while, you got to think about it to start with. But once you start doing it, it becomes automatic, and you have to put effort into not doing it. That's
it's true.
Where you got to think about so that I don't look for those things. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of what that one says to me.
Yeah, you made a great point of having to like tell yourself not to do it, right? So I was conversing with some Secret Service guys, years ago, and I asked him. I basically was like, I hear you guys' observational and awareness skills are like, on another level, and he was like, oh yeah, totally. He's like, I'm counting people everywhere I go. I'm just constantly counting. He's like, but sometimes I find myself counting people and exits and all these other things in situations where I know there's no threat, like period.
Right.
He's like, but I still am just doing it, and he's like, and I have to tell myself like, it's okay to relax for 5 seconds in this moment, Yep. All right. Let's see. Number 5, if you have the good fortune to take any prisoners, keep them separate till they are examined, and in your return, take a different route from that in which you went out, that you may the better discover any party in your rear and have an opportunity, if their strength be superior to yours, to alter your course or disperse as circumstances may require. Okay, so this one is like after, so you're after the fact, right? So let's say some guy approaches you, or let's say you're you get like boxed in, right, and you blow through. Okay, as soon as you blow through, you're not going to just like suddenly stop and go back to walking.
Go back,
right?
Exactly.
right? You're going to continue running. You're going to go to a safe place as much as possible. You're going to, let's say if firearms involved, you're going to be, ducking behind cover and all kinds of other things, right? You're not going to make yourself an easy target, right? Just because the initial engagement is over, right? The initial assault or whatever is over, doesn't mean that the actual situation is safe.
That's right. Good point. Very good point. Yep. And you mentioned, like with firearms handling and stuff, and I know you have a lot of expertise in that area as well. It's almost kind of like follow through when you shoot. When you pull that trigger, when that trigger breaks, you're not done. You still have things to do, that you have to do consistently and do properly in order to improve your accuracy, but even sometimes more importantly, be prepared for further action if one shot doesn't stop the threat, or if there's more than one threat. If you go bang and then, okay, I'm done, and drop your gun and everything, then you got to start from scratch again.
Yeah,
that's not a good position to be in.
Nope.
Yeah, in the same way if you're unarmed.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's see, number 6. Okay, this one's kind of longer, and there's a lot that I think we don't necessarily need to talk about, but there are some pieces that I think are important. So let's see. If you march in a large body of 300 or 400 with the design to attack the enemy, divide your party into 3 columns, each headed by a proper officer, and let those columns march in single files. The columns to the right and left keeping at 20 yards distance or more from that of the center. If the ground will admit, and let proper guards be kept in the front and rear and suitable flanking parties at a due distance as before directed, with orders to halt on all eminences. All right, basically yada, yada, yada. You're marching with them, and then here we go. So if the enemy approach you in your front on level ground, form a front of your 3 columns or main body with the advanced guard, keeping out your flanking parties as if you're marching under the command of trusty officers to prevent the enemy from pressing hard on either of your wings or surrounding you, which is the usual method of the savages if their number will admit of it, and be careful likewise to support and strengthen your rear. Okay, that was a mouthful. I think the first half we can kind of just omit because it's more just marching formations. But the second half, where it talks about, okay, now if the enemy approaches, this is what you do. All right. So what do you get from that? I know I kind of just like rambled it through, but
yeah, that one kind of almost lost me toward the end. I'll be honest with you, John.
No, you're good. It was like paragraphs like this big.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, if the enemy approaches, form your front 3 columns or the main body with the advanced guard, right? So basically, they're saying, give as strong of a front as you can if the enemy is approaching from the front, right? Which we talk about all the time. Like, you need to maximize your damage output, right? Which is going to be to wherever direction you're facing, right? And in self-defense, it's the same, which is why you have facing movements, right? The pivot step and the back step, right? So you can face because, you can't, not as effective this way as you are this way, right?
Okay.
So, you
one direction,
right. So you present your strongest front where it's needed, right? But just because your main focus is right there doesn't mean you can leave your wings unguarded or your rear unguarded, right? And we talk about this in modules 4 and 5. Yeah, modules 4 and 5. Okay, for anybody who wants to get on the SDC modules. 4 and 5, multiple attackers, right? And we talk about how to address multiple attackers, how to blast through a group, right, if need be, but also how to address the fact that you might have people coming from multiple angles, right? And knowing that, more often than not, whoever you're facing in the front is either stalling or providing opportunity for somebody to come up the rear, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what Rogers is saying is like, hey, the savages, whatever he wants to call them, 300 years ago, they would attack from the sides and the rear, right? They'd be like, oh, hey, here we are, but the real attack's coming from behind, right?
Yeah.
And that's totally true and relevant to self-defense.
Yep, it is. Yeah, and because you have to be aware of what's on, your different angles, because, okay, if your primary threat is right here, even in front, or you turn to make him in front, as soon as you deal with him, okay, the next guy in line becomes the primary. So you have to be aware so that you can adjust yourself to him and then take the fight to him, because this, one guy was the worst of the threat, judged either because he's closest or he's got the biggest stick or whatever. Yeah, as soon as you deal with him and neutralize him, then the next guy in line becomes the primary threat. So you got to be able to make those adjustments and be aware of what you're doing from attacker to attacker, if you would.
Right. Okay, this one's also really long. Not all of them are this long, but this one I think is actually pretty good. So we'll go through it here. All right. If you are obliged to receive the enemy's fire, fall or squat down till it is over, then rise and discharge at them. If their main body is equal to yours, extend yourselves occasionally. But if superior, be careful to support and strengthen your flanking parties to make them equal to theirs, that, if possible, you may repulse them to their main body. In which case, push upon them with the greatest resolution, with equal force in each flank and in the center, observing to keep at a due distance from each other, and advance from tree to tree, with one half of the party before the other 10 or 12 yards. If the enemy push upon you, let your front fire and fall down, and then let your rear advance through them, and do the like, by which time those who before were in front will be ready to discharge again, and repeat the same alternately, as occasion shall require. But this means you will keep up such a constant fire that the enemy will not be able to easily break your order or gain your ground. Whew, that's a mouthful.
That last statement is probably the most important to me out of that whole spiel.
Send it.
Keep up the fire and don't let the other guy catch his breath. Whether you have to do it in rotation or if it's just you do it. You take him, you take the wheel, and you don't let him get it back. I'm driving the car. We're gonna go where I want to go, not where you want to go. That's the big thing. That last statement. What I got out of it.
Yeah, that's something we talk about, Damien and us talk about is like, people are like, well, what if they do this? And it's like, frankly, I don't really care what they're doing because I'm going to make them care about what I'm doing.
Exactly. I know what they're going to do.
If I'm playing
the shit beat out of them. Yeah. They're going to be worried about what I'm doing to them. If I do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
exactly.
Right first. But if I'm doing it right, they're not, it's hard to plan an attack while you're getting physically injured at the exact same time. It's difficult.
Yeah, it is.
And that's kind of what we want to do, is overpower in a sense.
Yeah, overwhelming force.
Overwhelming. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, the part that I really like in the beginning, and there is some historical context for this, so bear with me, people.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the historical context, right? So if you think about, Clayton, how I know you like a bit of medieval and whatnot, military history too. So how did militaries fight during this time period?
Let's see. During that, it was pretty much in lines, most in open areas for the most part, and it was pretty structured. I mean, the guys stepped up, as I understand it, and they would shoot and they would back up while they were reloading because you had muskets, so that took a while. The other guys would step up and shoot. And once everybody shot enough, then eventually you may move forward and close, where it would become a more hand-to-hand. But it was very organized, from my understanding of it, at least until it got into the melee part, the hand-to-hand stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was considered "quote unquote" gentleman's warfare, right?
Yes, exactly.
You like I said, you're absolutely.
Rules of engagement.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They would stand in lines in box formations and shoot each other, right? So the first line would go boom, and then they would take a knee and they would do the reloading procedures, and the next line would shoot boom, and then they would take a knee, do their reloading procedures. Next line would shoot boom, take a knee. Right now, if everybody's really good at reloading their muskets, which we all know people of varying skill exist, you could be ready to fire your next iteration well within a minute, right? Like it wasn't unheard of for people to get 2 shots off, maybe even 3 shots off in 1 minute.
I tried loading a musket under stress one time. I think it took me 3 minutes. So
so imagine these guys that were really good that could do 3 in 1 minute, right? It's insane.
My hat's off to them.
But yeah, essentially they would just level, fire, and shoot, take a knee, level, fire, shoot, and take a knee, right? Now, that's what makes what Rogers said so unique. right, is because his what he told everybody to do is, if you start coming under fire, fall down or squat down till it's over. Don't stand there and be a meat shield.
Stand there and take it.
Right? He's like, no, that's dumb. Just drop to the ground and don't get shot.
Yeah.
Right. Which he got, I don't want to say in trouble, but he, one of the negatives towards him at the time was that he did not fight in the gentleman's warfare, which carried over to the American Revolution, right? When we had all of our irregular warfare groups, everybody talks about, like Morgan's marksmen and stuff like that, where it was like, the British were like, they're just shooting us out of the trees, and they're aiming for our officers and blah, 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 blah,
Right.
That was not something that they were, to them, that was savage, right? They were like, man, they're fighting like the savages.
Okay? That's the way the Indians fought or whatever. The Indians were fighting to win, buddy. They didn't care about
Yeah. And so the second thing is, he's saying, let them fire, which, today with modern weapons, I wouldn't do this. However, with a musket, this makes perfect sense. Okay. Is let them fire and then you immediately fire. They're reloading. Right.
Yep.
Which does come back to, like if there's a lull in their attack, that's when you need to attack. Right. If they catch you off guard, and this is essentially what he's saying is, if you are caught off guard and you receive fire, you need to wait till the appropriate moment to then attack. Right. And, the same thing happens in self-defense. You're not always going to be able to catch the first, right? You're not always going to be able to be the first person. Right. But the second you are able,
then unload.
Right. The split second you're able, you go on the offensive, you unload. Right.
Yep.
And that's pretty much what he says, and the rest of it is like, you then take the fight to them, you take ground, you push forward, you make them regret attacking you.
Oh, you shot at me? Ooh, bad move. Yeah.
And it's the same thing with self-defense, right? You take their ground, you fight, you make them regret picking you as a target.
Yeah, you convince them that they made a bad judgment call, basically.
Yeah. All right. Next one's much shorter. Here we go. All right, number 13. If you oblige the enemy to retreat, be careful in your pursuit of them to keep out your flanking parties and prevent them from gaining eminences or rising grounds, in which case they would perhaps be able to rally and repulse you in their turn. Okay. Solid principle in this one. Send it, Clayton.
Yeah, there's been many a battle that I forget that it's basically a pincer movement that a lot of armies fell for throughout history. When the middle breaks and starts, the center breaks and starts retreating, and the opposing army pours in behind them, and then all of a sudden they realize, oh guys, we're surrounded on three sides, by the enemy because we pursued the center deep into their group, and now we got enemies on three sides, and they turn around to run back out, and they close the pincer, and now they're not surrounded, but they have, let's say they have the opportunity to engage the enemy no matter what direction they face.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the situation, they would be completely surrounded. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, that did happen historically. But from a self-defense perspective, it's about not overextending yourself, right? If and from a legal perspective, it's about not chasing them down, right? So from a legal self-defense perspective, you're allowed to stop the threat, right? Once you become the aggressor, it's no longer self-defense, right? And so that's incredibly important from a self-defense legal perspective, but it's also about not overextending yourself, right? If you are, and if you're doing it and you start to turn the tides and they start running, you run after them, one, you're now wrong legally, but two, you don't know where they're running to. They could have like a group of buddies around the corner. You have no idea, right? And that's what Roger's saying is like, you have no idea what's going to happen if you start running after this person. But you need to recognize also that he was saying this because of two reasons. One, psychologically, when you start to defeat the enemy, you have the innate interest in taking the easy fight, right? Because now they're running, right? The hunter became the prey, so to speak. Okay. The other thing, though, is what was I going to say? Hold on. Oh, my brain.
Now you pulling one of my tricks.
I know, right? I forgot what I was going to say. All right, we'll move on. It was semi-important, but whatever. All right. Let's see. Number 9. If you are obliged to retreat, let the front of your whole party fire and fall back till the rear hath done the same, making for the best ground you can. By this means you will oblige the enemy to pursue you if they do it at all in the face of a constant fire. Okay. So from a self-defense perspective, again, going back to especially to multiple targets or multiple attackers, right? So one of the things we talk about is stacking people up, right? So if you turn and you start running, naturally people are faster and slower than other people, and so they start stacking up, especially if you go to a confined space, which forces them to funnel, right? And then if need be, as they catch up to you, you can quickly fight somebody off and then keep going, fight somebody off and keep going, right, until you get to safety. And that's literally what he's saying is you're literally going to retreat and fight as you go to make them think twice about wanting to come after you and to protect yourself as you're retreating, right? Because you can't necessarily just bolt out of there and be safe.
Yep.
All right. Number 10. If the enemy is so superior that you are in danger of being surrounded by them, let the whole body disperse and everyone take a different road to the place of rendezvous appointed for that evening, which must every morning be altered and fixed for the evening ensuing, in order to bring the whole party or as many of them as possible together, update any separation that may happen in the day. But if you should happen to be actually surrounded, form yourselves into a square, or if in the woods, a circle is best, and if possible, make a stand till the darkness of the night favors your escape. Okay. Send it, Clayton. What do you got?
Well, it's kind of it's a strategy that if you are outnumbered and if you are facing possible defeat or the likelihood of such, there's still some things you can do to at least postpone that or maybe reverse that situation. Because just like in a self-defense type situation, we're not always going to be able to take control immediately and run it to our, satisfaction from the get-go. But if you have to, I won't say back down, but if you have to regroup, let's put it that way, the way you do that can make a big difference in whether you still have a chance to get out of it on top or even just in one piece. Because let's face it, there are some situations that just getting out is a victory, even if the other guy's in a lot better shape than you are. So I think it kind of speaks to me of even when you're surrounded or outnumbered or at the disadvantage, you can't make a clear drive through to deal with the situation for whatever reason. That you still don't totally lose it. There's some principles and strategies that you can kind of try to follow that may give you the opportunity at best to turn things back around again, or at worst, at least let you get out of there still alive.
Yeah. I took a little bit different take from this. You're not wrong, but I took a little bit different take from this. So what I got from it was, if the enemy is superior, you're in danger of being surrounded, let the whole body disperse, right? And then go to your rendezvous point. So this talks again to planning and preparation, right? And what happens if you're with your family or your friends? A conversation that you should have with them is, hey, if a situation occurs, this is what you're going to do. And it should be the weak links, right? The small, the young, the weak, running and dispersing, right? Because if you disperse, it makes it harder for even a larger group to chase you down, right? They have to think about who do they want to go after, right? And then if you have to fight, then you shore yourself up, you make yourself as strong as possible, as defensive as possible, and you hold out for as long as possible, right? That was essentially what it's saying, until you can find an escape. It's the same thing, right? So if you get surrounded or you whatever, you hold out for as long as you possibly can. You bring the fight for as long and as hard as you possibly can until you can get to safety, hopefully, right?
That's right. Yeah, and that fits great with the self-defense stuff too. probably better than mine in the sense that, again, as primary protectors of a given group, as most of us are, it's critical that the people who are commonly with you understand what their role is to be if something happens. My wife, and when they were younger, especially my kids, even, they knew if somebody poses a threat, if I give you the code word, you leave, you go, you get out. I will catch up to you later because I cannot deal with this guy if I'm worried about what's happening to you. And yeah, they argued with me about it at first, but I think I finally got it through to them. My job as primary protector in our group most of the time is to stand and buy y'all time. Okay. Unless I can run and we all get away safely, hey, that'll work too. But if for some reason that just doesn't seem like the thing to do, I stay. Y'all don't argue. You go. I'll catch up to you. You know, you go, you call the police, you do whatever. But my job is to buy you time. If I can't do anything but that, I'm successful in my role. Hopefully, I'll come home whistling. But I might not come home, but you will. So, yeah, I can see that in that too. Absolutely.
All right. Number 11 is probably all we have time to do is finish number 11. So maybe we'll have to make a part 2 of this.
There you go.
if Damien's game for it later.
Yeah.
maybe the next time he's sick or something.
He's going to grill us on this probably. Only had 4 people
right.
watching and y'all run them all off.
I mean, it's actually been, it's been cycling, it's been like, it'll go like 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0,
Yep.
I don't know why people keep leaving or whatever, but
this is interesting. I need to work my brain a little bit after the stroke anyway.
All right. So number 11, if your rear is attacked, the main body and flankers must face about to the right or left as occasion shall require and form themselves to oppose the enemy as before directed. And the same method must be observed if attacked in either of your flanks, by which means you will always make a rear of one of your flank guards. All right. So again, this is essentially the same thing of what we talked about. Right? This is more a tactic than a principle, but the same concept applies in that anytime you make a facing movement, right, to address a threat, you've now exposed your rear to somewhere else, right? Anytime you move. So if my back is here, but then I face 180, my back is now in front of me, right? And so that's absolutely applicable to self-defense in that you always need to be spatially aware, right? You need to be aware of where you are in relation to buildings, chairs, desks, tables, in relation to other people, right? Innocent bystanders, other threats, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And every time you move, even if it's taking ground, you're exposing yourself to new environments, to new potential dangers.
That's right. It's very dynamic. You're right. It's very dynamic.
All right. So we will stop at 11. I'm going to actually make a little note here that we stopped at 11.
Okay. Yeah. Do that.
In case we do this again.
Even if Damien throws out, which he might, the entire idea of doing this, continuing this on a podcast, hell, I'm finding it interesting. Me and you can finish with on our own one day.
He's not going to throw it out. He's not going to throw it out. Yeah, we just might not get to number 2 right away.
Right.
I mean, out of 28, we got to 11, so it might actually be 3.
We did pretty good. Yeah, because I mean, these things are important, so they're worthy of a little bit of thought and conversation. Yeah, if we could just blow through them, that would mean that they're not really important. But I like the way you decided or came up with the idea of tying these hundreds of year-old principles to what we teach now, today. And even the teaching, elite military forces that have all these secrets, so to speak, and relating it to things that we teach and that we do in our daily lives. And then you realize, it's not really so much secrets. Once it's pointed out to you, it makes perfect sense. Once the light bulb comes off, oh man, why didn't I think of that before? That's the way we are with a lot of things. And
it goes back to principles are universal, right?
Right. Yep.
techniques change, tactics change, but principles are always universal. And so when you have good solid principles, you can find them in anything that utilizes solid principles.
Yep, and that makes good sense too. But yeah, talking about this was interesting because actually, in the State Guard, the South Carolina State Guard, which is not a federalized military organization.
Yeah, it's like the Texas Guard.
Yep, exactly. Yep. I think 23 state, all the states have provisions for them in their constitutions, in their state.
Yeah, but a lot don't have them.
But only 23, the last I heard, have active state guards. And in South Carolina, on the wall at our armory, we have one armory. The rest of the units borrow National Guard armories to drill at every month. But we have one headquarters armory. And on the wall is a picture, a portrait of every commander of the South Carolina State Guard, all the way back to who is considered the first one, Francis Marion, who is another example of the type of guerrilla warfare that we were just discussing. The swamp.
Yeah, Francis Marion. Yeah, Francis Marion is fantastic. Yeah, Francis Marion's fantastic.
He is credited with being the first commander of the South Carolina State Guard. His
cool.
portrait is first on the wall. Yep.
I mean, if you got to pick somebody to be first, that's not a bad first.
Pick a badass, right? Yeah, I ain't lying. But yeah, that's where
Francis Marion was awesome. All right, well, we're just about done. Those of you who watched and participated with us, super appreciate it. And till next time, next week, hopefully Damien's back with us. If not, we'll do part 2. If he is, we'll see what he wants to do.
Yeah,
we'll see what he wants to do.
If you joined us and left, if Damien's not feeling better, then we get part 2. So, yeah.
All right, everybody. As always, be safe, train honestly, and we will catch you all later.
All right. Appreciate it.